Welcome CSE 121 class to EX26. This is color labels and our little intro to working with our tkinter GUI module, part of Python. And if you're doing this one at home, since we're not using Repel for this one, you'd want to make sure first that you install Python at home, whether you're on Windows or Mac. And if you go to python.org, you could go here to install the latest Python version, at least right now, is 3.7.3. And I have instructions for doing that in Documents and Resources on my Warren, so I won't go over all of that right now, but you'd want to install that first and make sure you add to path. And then also you'd want to download and install Visual Studio Code. That's the one I recommend right now. I used to use Atom, but I like Visual Studio Code, and we've been using that in class. And I'm on a Mac right now, so this says download for Mac, but you can download it for Windows as well, and they're very similar. Not very many differences between the Mac and Windows version. So make sure you install that, and I'm going to launch it right now. Here's my version on a Mac that I'm going to launch. And you might have a welcome screen and different things come up first. I'm going to X out of that. One thing you do want to do is go to your extensions, which is this little thing here. It says extensions. I'm not sure what that icon is, but I'm going to go there. And I have some installed already, so I don't have to go through installing them. But you want to make sure you install the Python extension. It's the one by Microsoft, whatever latest version it is. If you're not there, you can just search extensions and just type in Python. It's probably one of the first ones you'll see, and it'll be the most popular one. So make sure you have that. And then another thing you want to do, and I can see I have some things here saying open file or folder. Now, Windows has a version that just says open folder or open file when we did that in class, but the Mac version doesn't have open folder, but they do the same thing. So what you're going to want to do, like I'm doing on a Mac, I'm going to want to go file open. Now, they don't have open folder, at least on my version, but you would go to open folder if you were on Windows. So I'm going to go to open, and there's also something called workspace, by the way, which I'll talk about later, but that creates a little shortcut to wherever your files are at. So if you have multiple folders that you're working on, maybe you're doing web development projects and Python projects and different things, you'd probably want to have workspaces. But for what we're doing right now, just open folder or open on a Mac is fine. So I'm going to go to open, and I'm going to go and just find my stuff under documents. I have them in a GitHub folder, and there's my Python practice files, and inside here I have a TK folder. So I'm going to just select that right now. It says open, so I don't want to go in further. I just want to select that and say open. If it finds a folder, it'll open the folder. And here's my TK folder, and what I have inside here right now is a finished version of EX26. And I'll close this again, and I'll open this up. I'll double click to open it up. And notice I don't have a terminal showing right now, so I could go to New Terminal. And if you're on Windows, it may say PowerShell. It should mimic your PowerShell. Notice that right here it's going to TK, so it defaults. If you open a folder, it should default to that directory. That's, well, so you don't have to go CD and keep finding the different directories to go to. So make sure you open folder on Windows or on Mac. Just open a particular folder that you have your Python files in. So I'm just going to test this out right now, and I'm just going to type Python. Now on a Mac, I have to type Python 3. You may just have to type Python. Try that first. But I have to type Python 3 because I think I have both versions installed. So I'm going to type Python 3, and I'm going to type in my name here, which is the file name, ex26-fin, because it's the finished one, .py. And I'll hit enter. And this is kind of the finished product. You can see it's just a window that inherits the properties of my Mac interface. If you're on Windows, this will look more Windows-like. It just has three labels side by side, a red, green, and blue, like RGB. And they have background colors, and they have foreground colors, which are the type colors, and they even have a font that's in here. And then there's three buttons below that are all side by side in kind of a white area at the bottom. And the only thing we're going to do with this is we're just going to click on button 1, and it's going to change that to purple, and it's going to change the text to purple. So that's all that's going to happen right now, and we're going to talk about kind of laying this out a little bit. We're going to use the pack method on this one, which is the simplest method, but it doesn't give us a lot of flexibility. So I'm going to close this up before I could do anything else. And just look at the code. Just a couple things to point out. You have to import tkinter, and we're going to use from tkinter import all. That's usually recommended. There's less typing. You don't have to keep typing tkinter every time to precede certain things in here. And notice you can use Python functions. So we're going to eventually put a function in here. But the first thing you're going to want to do is set up your root window. I'm going to use M to be kind of the instance name of my root window. It could be root, it could be master, it could be MR. I'm just going to use M because that's shorter. And it's going to be M equals TK with a capital T and parentheses. And that's going to be using the TK class. And that's going to start off our window. You don't have to use this title attribute here. It'll use TK by default, but I'm going to put it in there. And you can also put sizes and even starting points of the window if you want to. Then we're going to have all our widgets in here. We're going to have frame widgets eventually. We have label widgets is what you just saw. We have button widgets, and then we have to pack everything up. So it's a little more labor intensive. It's kind of like laying out a web page somewhat. So I'm going to start this from scratch. I'll keep this open just in case I need to go back and make the video a little quicker. But if you're going to start this from scratch, you can go into here's your TK folder, and it does put all, even though I have a lowercase TK, it puts it in all caps up here, and it does that on Windows too. I'm going to make a new file here rather than going file new. Just make a new file here because then it'll put it right in your folder. And I'll just call it ex26-v. I'll put V for video, and then it's .py, and make sure it always ends in py because VS Code will recognize it as a Python file with the .py on it. And we're going to start this as from tkinter, and I'll say tkinter even though it's really tkinter, import all. And that's the way we're going to start it off. And notice that when you see a circle here, it means it's not saved, and when you see an X, it means it's saved. Now, if you want to, you can go to Preferences. I'll go to Settings, and they should have an autosave that's set up on here. Autosave is off right now. I'll just put it on right now, and I know it's a little bit different. I think it's 1,000 milliseconds or something, so that's almost every second. So I'll put that on right now and close up my settings. And that way it should keep it saved so you don't have to keep doing Control S. That'll be a little helpful. And then what we'll do in here is we'll call our root, and I'll just call M equals TK to start that. And then I could do m.title if I want to put a title on my window. And I'll just put EX26 color labels. And you can put a size here, you could put all kinds of things right now, but I'll just leave it like this. One thing you have to remember, and I'll mention this first, is to finish up the window. Well, actually, I'll show this right away. I'll save this. And now down here, if you don't have a terminal open, even if I close this up, you can go New Terminal, and it should default to the folder that you're in. And then I'm going to type Python 3. I have to use 3 because of 2 versions. You may just have to type Python, and then a space, and then your file name. And you won't have to keep doing this because you could use the up arrow on your keyboard to kind of duplicate it. So I'll use ex26.py. You can see this would be a pain to be typing all the time. And I'll hit enter or return. And nothing happened. And the reason nothing happened, well, there could be a couple reasons, but the reason nothing happened is I don't have main loop in here. That means the window opened and closed in like a second. So I need to do something here called m.main loop, and that'll basically run a loop so the window stays open. So that's always going to be at the bottom of our file. So if I do that and try it again, now I don't have to retype this. I could hit my up arrow. It'll copy the last prompt that I put in there and hit enter. And now there's my window. And this is just a blank window. I guess it has a default size here, but there's nothing in it. So that's what we're going to build some things. We're going to put some labels and some buttons in here. Now, before you could do anything else, you can't keep going in here and running it again until you close this. And if it goes away, you might think, well, how do I close this? Now on a Mac, I have a little Python kind of icon here. On a Windows, it's a little bit different. You'll see a different Python icon, but you'll see a Python icon down at the bottom. And if you just click on that, it should bring your window up. Then you could close this, and then you could always run it again. So what I'm going to do in here is I'm going to make a label widget to start, and I'm just going to go in here and do, and I like to call my labels like lab 1, lab 2, like 3-letter names for my buttons, my labels, and even my entry field. So I'll call it lab 1, and I'll say equals, and you have to use the label widget with a capital L, just like that. And then in parentheses, then you could put any kind of configuration that your labels might have. But before you even do that, you have to indicate where its parent is, the root. So I have to put M here and then do a comma. And you're going to, everything, all the configurations that you put in here are going to be separated by commas in here. So I'm going to put M, and then I'll put text equals, And that's basically a string that's going to show up on the label, and I'll just call it red for now. And then I'll put a comma, BG equals, and then I'll use it as a string, and I'll just use red right now. As a string, you can also put hex colors in here. So if I wanted red as a hex color, I could do FF0000. I could do that, but I'm just going to use red right now because that's simpler. And I'm also going to do a foreground color, which is the text, and I'll just make that white. And I don't have to save it if it has an X there. One thing I will have to do is I'll have to pack it. Now, because if I just ran it right now, I just have the window, so I don't have my label packed. I need to pack my label. So I'll pack it, and I'll put a space here, because we're going to eventually put all our labels and buttons and then pack everything together. So I have to do lab1.pack, just like that, and we can put other things inside there. But if I do that, I should at least be able to see my label and see what the default looks like. I'll run that one more time. There it is, and it's really tiny. It's only the size of the label. Everything shrank to the size of the label, so we certainly want to make that bigger. That's why I said we could put width in here if we want. So I'll put another property of width, and width is actually the character size of the text. So it's kind of like characters. So I'll put width of 12 for like 12 characters. I think it's just going to be the number. And if this thing is still here, I got to close this up. And now I'll run it again. And there it is. So it's like 12 characters, or a little bit more than what was there. And you can see it's just a default size around there. So you can put a height in there, which is also characters. So it'd be that many characters high. I'll put a height of 3 in here just to see what happens. And I'll run it again. And there it is, and you can see it, and it creates space around here. You can also use padding in here as well instead of width and height. And I'm going to make another label. As long as I have this here, I'll make another label. And the sizes here may be different from the notes, and that's okay. I'll make another one. I'll call it Lab2, and usually people forget to change these things. And it's still going to be the same root. This time I'll make the text green, and I'll make the background green, keep the foreground white, and I'll leave it the way it is right now. And while I'm at it, I'll do a blue one as well. And I'll pack all these together. So if I have 3 labels, I have to pack these. Make sure you get all the names changed if you're doing copying and pasting. I'll close this up from the last time, and I'll run it down here in my terminal. And there it is. And by default, packing will just stack them. It's kind of like web design. They're kind of like block objects. So whatever you do, they'll just keep stacking. In order to put them side by side, you have to almost do like a float kind of thing, where you'd go in here and put side equals left. And they use all caps when you do that. And I'll actually put this in all 3 right now. So let me run it again, and let me close this up. And there it is. So that's working okay. I'm not sure why the green wavy lines are there, but that's the way it sets up. It kind of like floats them to the left of each. And I'm also going to make 3 buttons. We'll try buttons in here. And let's make the text a little bigger so this is easier to see. So I can do one more thing here. I'll do a comma, and I'll say font equals, and then I'll put another set of parentheses. I think I used Cambria on the other, so I could try that out. If you don't have any, just put none, because I think you need a font property. And then inside here, I'll put a comma, and I'll put a size of like 24. Now that'll make the label bigger if you make a size like that. You can also put a style like bold or something in there as well. So you could put, I think, bold. I'm not sure if it's in quotes or not, but we'll see what happens. And if I'll just do it to the 1, and then if it looks fine, I'll copy it. And run it one more time. And you can see what that did. It made it bold, it made it bigger, and it kind of filled up that area. The other 2 are still that way, so I'll close this up, and then I'll copy this whole thing, and notice that there is another parenthesis. So I'll just put this, I'll put a comma, and then paste it here. And now they should all be the same when I go to run it again. And there it is. So that's the basic kind of setup with this. Now nothing's happening here. I'm going to throw some buttons so we can make something happen. Okay, here's my buttons. I have button 1, button 2, button 3, and it's the button widget, and it has a capital B, and it also is using M right now. And I've text called button 1, button 2, and button 3. And I put a pad in there. Padding X means that on either side, just to give a little room on the button. And I also put a font. Notice I put none and 16 to make the font a little bit bigger in the button, but I didn't choose, I'll just use a default font, so I just left it as none. So I use that same kind of font property there. Now I still have to pack these things. So here's my buttons packed down here. You can see I have button 1, button 2, button 3 packed. And I also did side left, side left, side left, so that they can be side by side like my original example. Now, if I do that right now, let me just make sure that I have everything okay. I have my roots here. If I do this right now and I run it, and I'll close up this thing, okay, it'll put them side by side. It doesn't know when to stop that side left thing, and there's no real easy way to do this except possibly putting them in a frame. Frames are almost, you could almost use them like containers, like you would a div on a web page, to avoid this kind of thing, because you run into the same kind of problems with floats if you've worked with CSS. So we want this underneath. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create two frames. So these are my labels, so I'll just indicate them as labels with a comment, and I'll just use frames as FR1, and it's going to be a frame, same way, they all get set up the same way, and its root is going to be M. I don't think I'm going to do anything else with it. I think that's all I need to do. And then I'm going to make a frame 2, because they're just going to be kind of containers, and then I'm going to pack them kind of on top of each other. So I'm going to go down here and do FR1.pack, and FR1 I'm going to say side equals top. So it kind of stacks. FR2, I'm going to pack it side equals bottom. So I have them both packed, and so these things should still be side by side. Now if I run it right now, the whole idea that I didn't rename this, so let me make sure I rename that. So I have a frame 1 and frame 2 before I get an error. Now, one thing I want to do, the whole purpose of doing these frames was so I could put the labels in frame 1 and put the buttons in frame 2. That way they could kind of be kind of enclosed in there so they could stack. They could still, individually, they could still all be a side of each other using this. But then in their containers, there'll be a top and bottom container. The way to change that, the way to say that my labels are in frame 1 and my buttons are in frame 2 would be to change the root here. So this root would be FR1. They would all be FR1, so I'll just copy these. And then this one would be FR2, copy and paste the right things here. So that's their new parent. Their new parent is now frame 1 and frame 2, so they stack. And then I'm going to just click on this thing here, run it, and that's what I want. Now if I want a little space, I could use padding Y in frame 2, because you can see it's kind of jammed together here, so I could close this up and put in frame 2, I could put a property of pad Y equals, now the padding uses more pixels, so I'm going to do something like 12 right now and see how that works. And that should be okay. And it's saved because I see the little X there. And I close my window, so it's ready to go and check out. And that looks a little bit better. And if I want more, I could add more, but that's all I want right now. And what I'm going to do is just put a little command on a button here to change the color of that. So let me take a break here. What I have so far, we'll make a button event so that it actually runs a function from this button and changes that. So that's what we'll do for part 2.